Have you ever had one of those days where deep down, your life is about to become a cautionary tale? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I was in my early 20s, working at a popular petrol station on a major freeway. You know the type: endless rows of snacks, a wall of energy drinks, a constant stream of cranky travelers, and the unspoken rule that everyone was just barely holding it together, including me. I'd taken the job for the same reasons most people do. Bills don't pay themselves. It was predictable work, decent pay for my age, and a crew that mostly minded their own business. The only real downside was that it was the sort of place where tiny infractions, grabbing the wrong cup for your shift coffee, letting a crate sit a little too long in the aisle, could send management into a meltdown. But for a while, things were fine. My shifts were uneventful, and I knew how to fly under the radar. I was young, polite, and determined not to cause waves. Then came the day I made the mistake of trying to stay hydrated. One afternoon, while reaching for my drink bottle under the counter, my back decided to throw in the towel. Specifically, I slipped a disc between L5-S1. You don't realize how many muscles it takes to simply stand up until one of them fails you. The pain was instant, blinding, and so intense that I thought I might pass out. That injury set off a chain reaction. Weeks of being barely able to move, my mother having to dress me because I couldn't bend, and a dependence on painkillers that made me feel like I was floating in someone else's life. Eventually, after a cocktail of physiotherapy, medications, and sheer stubbornness, I was cleared to return to work on minimal hours. I had no intention of suing or blaming the company. It was a fluke accident, and honestly, if it hadn't happened on the job, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford the treatment I needed. So I came back, grateful to be working again. I wish I could say this was the end of the story, that I eased back into my old routines and everything was fine. But that's not how this works, is it? Because in the retail universe, you can go from model employee to villain faster than you can say store policy. And my lesson was about to arrive in the form of a plastic coffee cup and a manager who'd apparently been waiting for a reason to watch me burn. It started innocently enough. I was on a short shift, trying to get through 4 hours without my back seizing up. On this particular day, my throat was killing me. Every word felt like I was swallowing sandpaper, and I knew that a warm coffee wasn't going to help. What I really needed was something cold. Something that might soothe the ache and let me get through the shift without sounding like a chain smoker. In our store, it was standard practice to grab a coffee once a shift. You poured it into a specific cup, white, generic, the size of my hand, and went about your day. But no one had ever mentioned any big rule about swapping that coffee for something else. So, trying to be responsible, I walked over to the 2IC Clifford. Clifford was the kind of supervisor who was usually pretty chill. He was a bit of a gossip, always smirking about something. But as far as I knew, he wasn't out to get me. I asked him if it would be okay to pour a slushie into my coffee cup instead. He said, verbatim, "Yeah, that's cool. Just put it in the coffee cup." I even double-checked because I didn't want to get dinged over something petty. He repeated himself, gave me a thumbs up, and I thought nothing of it. I poured the slushie, nursed it through my shift, and felt grateful to have some relief. The next morning, I woke up to a ping on my phone, an official email from the company. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. You never get emails like that unless something's wrong. I tapped the notification, bleary-eyed, and read, "You are hereby suspended without pay pending investigation for a serious breach of conduct." I blinked at the screen. My heart started hammering. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't been late. What on earth had I done? I fired off a reply, politely asking for clarification, and was told we'd be meeting in 2 days' time to discuss the matter. Those 2 days were hell. I replayed every moment of my last shift. Had I left a till open? Shortchanged a customer? I even asked my mom if she could think of anything I'd done wrong. She reminded me I'd been so careful lately, especially since my injury had put me on management's radar. When the day arrived, I walked into the adjacent building, where the meeting was held. It felt like an interrogation chamber. Around the table were 5 people. Me, my support person who was mostly there to make sure I didn't faint, Clifford, the store manager, and 2 HR reps. The manager opened with a tone so serious you'd think I'd embezzled thousands. We've called you here today because you've committed an offense that is grounds for immediate termination. My palms went clammy. My vision fuzzed at the edges. It was that same terror you get going through airport customs, wondering if you've accidentally packed something illegal. I croaked. Can you please explain what offense you mean? The manager leaned back in his chair and asked, with the smugness of a man who thought he'd just nailed a criminal. Do you understand the definition of stealing? My brain froze. I would like to think so. Then he launched into it. On Monday, you consumed a slushie poured into a coffee cup. This is a breach of policy. It is considered theft. Relief washed over me, almost dizzying. That was it? I actually laughed. A short, shocked sound. Oh, this is all a misunderstanding. I asked Clifford if it was okay. He said yes. I turned to Clifford, expecting him to nod. Instead, Clifford looked me dead in the eyes and said, "That never happened." The room fell silent. My stomach hit the floor. My ears roared. I realized, in that moment, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup, and I was about to lose everything over a 3-cent slushie. For a few seconds, all I felt was shock. Then confusion. Then fury. Then something else entirely. A calm that settled into my bones. Because as Clifford's lie sank in, I started to remember all the little things I'd witnessed. All the petty theft. All the affairs. All the drugs. And for the first time since my back injury, I realized that maybe I had more power than I thought. I let out a big sigh. The room waited. The manager looked smug. Clifford looked satisfied. HR looked like they were bracing for me to burst into tears. Instead, I smiled. I thought about that Oreo incident. About the store manager, a week earlier, deliberately knocking a pack of cookies off the shelf, laughing and saying, "Oops, I guess I'll have to write that off for my morning tea." At the time, I hadn't cared. But now it felt like the universe had handed me a loaded slingshot. Then I thought about Clifford. The fresh marriage, the pregnant wife, the gossip I'd overheard about him sneaking into the bathroom with Trina. I had never repeated it, never weaponized it. But as he sat there lying through his teeth to ruin my job, I felt no guilt about what was coming next. I realized I didn't have to scream or cry or beg. All I had to do was calmly lay out every single thing I'd witnessed. Because if they were going to treat me like a criminal, I was going to show them what real misconduct looked like. And in that moment, my plan was simple. I'd burn every bridge on the way out, and salt the earth so nothing could grow back. I took a slow breath. My heart wasn't even racing anymore. I had gone past fear and straight into a kind of icy clarity I'd never felt before. The manager cleared his throat, probably expecting me to stammer out an apology. Clifford had that smug little tilt to his head, like he'd already won. They thought I was cornered. I looked up, straight at the manager. He was tapping his pen against a stack of paperwork. Maybe my termination forms all ready to go. I kept my voice calm and said, "All right, but if I'm confused about what counts as stealing, I'd like to clarify something." He blinked. "Go ahead." So I laid it out in perfect detail. How I had watched him, just a week prior, deliberately knock a pack of Oreos onto the floor, pick them up and say, loud enough for customers to hear, that he'd have to write them off for his morning tea. I described the smirk on his face, the little giggle, the way he tucked the cookies under his arm. The manager's smile vanished. He paled so fast I thought he might faint. HR shifted in their chairs, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Before he could even splutter out a response, I turned to Clifford. I tilted my head slightly and said, "And as for your credibility, I'm just curious if you're aware that sleeping with a cashier in the staff bathroom during shifts is also a serious breach of conduct?" Clifford's mouth actually dropped open. The room felt like the air had been sucked out of it. You could have heard a pin drop. He tried to interrupt, mumbling something about personal matters. But I kept going. Calm, steady, factual. I named the cashier Trina. I described the days they'd disappear for 20 minutes at a time. How the rest of us would have to cover the counter. I didn't stop there, because if I was going to be the villain in their little story, I was going to be the best damn villain they'd ever seen. I looked back at HR and said, And if we're talking about policy breaches, I can also share that roughly half the staff are smoking weed on their breaks. I don't care what people do with their time, but if you want to enforce rules fairly, I think you should have the full picture. There was no yelling.
No dramatic gestures.
Just quiet, relentless facts. For 30 solid minutes, I listed everything I'd seen. Expired food being eaten off the shelves. Stock being stolen. A supervisor who clocked in her boyfriend under a fake employee number so he could collect pay without working. I laid it all out like a surgeon exposing a tumor. By the time I finished, the manager was staring at the table, lips white. Clifford had sweat dripping down his temple. One HR rep was frantically scribbling notes. The other was watching me like they couldn't decide if they were terrified or impressed. The meeting ended in a stunned, awkward silence. They said they'd review the information. I stood up, smoothed my uniform, and walked out without another word. Felt incredible. I wish I could say I walked out of there feeling nothing but triumph. But in truth, the adrenaline wore off quickly, and I spent the next few days in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. If I'd burned every bridge I'd ever built for nothing more than petty revenge. But then I remembered Clifford's eyes when he said, "That never happened." The way the manager looked so satisfied at the thought of firing me over a 3-cent slushie. And I knew, deep down, I wouldn't have changed a thing. 3 days later, I got a call from HR. My heart was thudding as I picked up. I was sure this was it, the official termination. I had already accepted that there was no way I could go back to work with people who'd so happily thrown me under the bus. Instead, the voice on the line sounded weirdly apologetic. "We'd like you to come in to discuss your position." I didn't even bother dressing up for it. I wore jeans, a hoodie, hair in a bun. I was ready to walk in and collect my final paperwork. When I arrived, the atmosphere was surreal. HR looked nervous. The manager wasn't there. Clifford wasn't there. The room felt emptier somehow. They asked me to sit down, then launched into the most groveling speech I'd ever heard. "After a thorough investigation, we've determined that your conduct does not constitute theft. Additionally, we've uncovered multiple breaches of policy among other staff members." Translation: "Your meltdown exposed a mountain of problems we can't ignore." They said Clifford and Trina had both resigned. Apparently, Clifford's wife had discovered the affair and was trying to drag Trina over the counter every time she came to work. 18 employees had been terminated or suspended pending further review. The manager, on indefinite leave, which I took to mean packing his things in a cardboard box. Then they slid a paper across the table, an offer for a promotion to 2IC. I stared at it. Part of me was tempted to laugh. These people had tried to paint me as a thief, had tried to ruin me, and now they were offering me a management job to patch the hole I'd left behind. I didn't give them an answer right away. I told them I needed to think about it. After the meeting, I wandered back over to the main store. There he was, my manager, literally in tears, packing his office into a sad little box. Couldn't resist.
I walked over, smiling.
"Rough day." He sniffed, didn't look up. "Going on leave." "Well, best of luck," I said brightly. "Take care." I turned and walked out, feeling lighter than I had in months. In the end, I declined the promotion. I knew there was no way I could ever go back and pretend that any of them were people I could trust. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was incinerated. 3 days later, I quit officially.
No fanfare, no tears.
Just a simple resignation letter and the knowledge that, sometimes, standing up for yourself means you walk away scorched but unbowed. I booked a trip to another country on my credit card. It was impulsive, reckless, and the best 2 weeks of my life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up without dreading the day ahead. Looking back, I still smile when I think about the faces around that table. The stunned silence. The dawning horror that their petty little power play had backfired spectacularly. I've learned that sometimes, petty revenge isn't about screaming or slamming doors. Sometimes it's as simple as calmly laying out the truth and watching it burn down everything false around you. And if there's a moral, it's this: never corner someone who has nothing left to lose. You might just hand them the match they need to set the whole place on fire.